You've got a shovel out in the shed with a bent blade. You know exactly which spot in the yard did that. It's the spot where the water sits for 3 days after a rain. And then come July, that same ground bakes so hard you couldn't drive a tent stake into it with a hammer. You've buried good money in that ground. Tomato plants in May, a bag of fertilizer that promised the world, maybe a truckload of topsoil that just sort of disappeared into it. And every fall, you stand there looking at what little came up, doing the math on what it cost you, and the number isn't kind. $40 here, 60 there, year after year. Now I want to tell you something, and I need you to hear it. That ground is not bad ground. And you are not a bad gardener. Heavy clay is some of the richest soil in this country. It's locked is all, locked up tight. And nobody ever handed you the key. There's a reason nobody handed it to you, and we'll get to that reason before we're done today. My name is Walter Hayes. I'm 68 years old, and I farm the same Ozark ground in Missouri that my grandfather worked back in the 1940s. Red clay, most of it, the kind that sticks to your boots in April and rings like a brick in August. I've spent 50 years learning what that ground wants. And most of what I know I learned the hard way, or I learned from a man born before the tractor was common. Today, I'm going to give you 7 ways to turn heavy clay into dark, crumbly soil that grows just about anything. Most of them cost you nothing. Not one of them costs more than $5. I'll be straight with you because that's the only way I know how to talk. This is not a one-weekend fix. You'll see real improvement the first season, and in 2 or 3 years, you won't recognize your own dirt. And number 6 on this list. Number 6 is a 40-cent trick that does the work of a $500 machine. And it does that work while you sit on the porch. Most folks have never heard of it. Don't you leave before we get there. Let's get into it. Number 1, know what you're standing on. Before you spend a dime or lift a shovel, go out after a rain and dig down about 6 inches. Take a handful of that soil and squeeze it. If it rolls into a shiny, sticky ball that holds together like the modeling clay your kids used to play with, that's heavy clay. If you can press it flat between your thumb and finger into a little ribbon 2 inches long, that's heavy clay for certain. Now, here's the part that changes everything. So, let it sink in. Those tiny clay particles hold onto nutrients the way sandy soil never could. Iron, potassium, calcium. The richness is already down there. Folks with sandy ground would trade you in a heartbeat because you can fix structure, but you can't easily fix poverty. Here's where most folks go wrong. They treat clay like an enemy to be hauled off and replaced. So they dig out a hole, fill it with bagged soil, and plant into it. Then the first heavy rain fills that soft pocket like a bucket because the clay walls around it won't let the water out, and the roots drown sitting in it. Don't fight your clay. Unlock it. Everything else on this list is a key. Number 2, organic matter and plenty of it. This is the backbone of the whole thing. Rotted leaves, grass clippings, straw from a local farmer, composted manure, wood chips that have sat and darkened for a year or two. Any of it works, and the best one is whichever one you can get free and close to home. Spread it on top of your planting beds at least 2 to 3 inches deep. 4 is better. 6 is better still. Then take a digging fork and work it into the top 6 or 8 inches of soil. If your back has opinions about that, hear this. You can skip the digging entirely. Lay compost 2 inches thick right on the surface every spring and every fall, and let the rain and the worms carry it down for you. It works. It just works slower. Now, why does this fix clay? Those flat clay particles stack on each other like wet sheets of paper, and water and roots can't get between the sheets. Organic matter wedges those particles apart into little crumbs with air space between them, and it feeds the earthworms, and every tunnel a worm digs is a drain pipe and an air shaft you didn't have to dig yourself. Some folks spread compost for 2 or 3 years and swear it did nothing. Almost every time one of three things went wrong. They put down a dusting when the ground needed inches, they worked the soil soaking wet and packed it right back down, or they quit at year one right before it turns the corner. Inches, not dustings. Every single year. Now, while we're stopped between shovels, let me ask you something. Add up what that stubborn patch of ground has cost you over the years. The plants that didn't make it. The bags and bottles that didn't deliver. I'd wager it's a few $100s, and that's being gentle. Everything on this channel is the kind of fix you do once. Cheap. The way our grandparents did it, and then it's done. Subscribing doesn't cost you 1 cent, and it might be the smartest thing you do for that garden all week. The button's right there under this video. Number 3, the sand mistake. This one I have to warn you about, because it's the most common advice out there, and it has ruined more gardens than the drought of 1980. Somebody will tell you clay is dense, sand is loose, so mix sand into clay and you'll get loose soil. What you actually get most of the time is something close to homemade concrete. Those fine sand grains settle into the gaps between the clay particles, and the whole thing sets up harder than what you started with. Folks have spent 10 years undoing that one afternoon of work. Now, I'll be fair about it, because you may have a neighbor who swears sand saved their garden, and they may not be lying. The difference is volume and the kind of sand. Coarse, sharp river sand, added in enormous amounts, close to half the volume of the soil, along with heavy organic matter, can work. But for most of us, that's tons of material, real money, and real risk. When leaves and compost do the job for free, with no risk at all. While I'm at it, folks always ask about gypsum, that powdered amendment in the white bag. Here's my honest answer. On certain salty, sodium-heavy clays, mostly out west, gypsum can genuinely help loosen things. On the ordinary red and brown clay covering most of the eastern half of this country, it does very little. If you're curious, test one small bed for a season before you buy bags for the whole yard. That's the old rule. Test small, then believe your own eyes. Number 4, raise your planting up. Even 4 to 6 inches makes a difference you can see in one season. Clay's biggest sins are waterlogging and compaction, and raising the bed answers both. Mound the soil up into beds about 3 to 4 feet wide, with walkways between them, and the water drains off the high ground into the paths instead of standing where your roots live. And once you have set beds and set walkways, you stop stepping where you plant. Every footstep on wet clay presses it tighter, and one season of walking on a bed can undo a year of amending it. Now here's the catch nobody tells you, and it has cost people whole gardens. If you build a raised bed on top of hard clay without breaking up what's underneath, you've built a bathtub. The water runs down through your nice fluffy bed, hits that clay pan at the bottom, and sits there with nowhere to go, and your roots rot from below while the surface looks dry. So before you fill any raised bed, take a digging fork and crack the ground underneath. You don't have to turn it over. Just drive the fork in 8 or 10 inches, lean it back, and loosen every 6 inches or so across the whole footprint. 20 minutes of work, and your bed drains clean instead of drowning quiet. Number 5, air without the violence. Clay packs so tight that roots and the living things in the soil can't breathe. The answer is to open it gently. The tool I'd hand you is a broad fork, or a plain garden digging fork if that's what's in the shed. Drive the tines in, rock the handle back until you hear the ground crack, pull the fork out, step back 6 or 8 inches, and do it again. You're not flipping the soil, you're not stirring it, you're just opening seams for air and water, and the worms do the rest. My grandfather never owned a rototiller in his life, and his ground was the envy of the county because tilling clay over and over breaks the crumbs you worked so hard to build and leaves a hard, smeared pan right below where the blades reach. Now, 2 warnings, and I mean them. First, never work clay wet. Squeeze a handful before you start. If it shines or smears like putty, walk away and come back in 2 or 3 days. Clay only gives you a narrow window when it's damp but crumbly, and working it outside that window does more harm than a month of rain. Second, if your knees and back don't bend like they used to, the broad fork is your friend, because your legs and body weight do the work instead of your spine. Slow, steady, no lifting. That tool has kept men my age in the garden 10 extra years. Half the list is behind us now, and I haven't forgotten my promise. That 40-cent trick that drills your clay for you while you rest is coming up next. And after it, the one habit that protects all this work, so you never have to start over. Stay with me. Number 6, here it is, the plant that breaks clay for you. It's called the daikon radish. Some seed catalogs call it tillage radish, and the old-timers I knew called it bio-drilling, back before that was a fancy word. You scatter the seed over your bed in late summer, around August or early September, rough up the surface so the seed touches soil, and walk away. That radish sends a taproot down a foot or more, sometimes deeper, punching straight through hardpan that would bend your shovel. Then winter comes, the frost kills it, and the root rots right there in the ground. Come spring, you've got hundreds of deep, open channels filled with soft, organic matter, top to bottom, like somebody went through with a drill press. Water follows those channels down. Roots follow them down. A packet of seed runs a couple of dollars and covers a good-sized bed, which is where my 40 cents a bed comes from against the $500 a heavy tiller costs, and the radish reaches deeper than the tiller ever will. Pair it with winter rye, and you've got the old 1-2 punch. The radish drills deep, and the rye throws out a thick mat of fine roots that crumbles the top few inches. Some folks plant clover the season before a garden for the same reason, and it feeds the ground nitrogen while it works. Here's where most folks go wrong with this one. They let the radish go to seed in spring instead of letting frost kill it or mowing it down before it flowers. And then they've got volunteer radishes everywhere. Kill it, leave the root in the ground, and plant right between the holes. The dead root is the whole point. Now, hold that thought, because what I just described works a little different depending on where you live. And that's exactly why I want to know where you're gardening. Put your state or your USDA zone, if you know it, in the comments below. Up north, that radish trick needs to go in by mid-August. Down south, you've got until October. I read every one of those comments, and what you tell me decides what we cover next on this channel. So tell me where you and your clay are fighting it out. Number 7, never let your soil stand naked. This is the habit that protects everything else on this list. Bare clay is clay going backward. Every hard rain hits exposed ground like 1,000 little hammers, packing the surface into a crust and washing your best topsoil down the hill. So once you've amended, once you've forked, once you've planted, you cover. Shredded leaves, 3 to 4 inches deep. Grass clippings, spread in thin layers an inch at a time so they don't mat and sour. Straw, aged wood chips on paths and around perennials. Pile it on heavy in the fall especially, and let it sit all winter like a blanket. Underneath that blanket, the worms work all season where the soil stays damp and shaded, and by spring, half your mulch has become soil. If slugs get thick under heavy mulch in your spring weather, just rake it off the beds in March and toss it on the compost pile. You lose nothing. And one more old trick that goes hand in hand with covering. When you harvest, don't yank plants out by the roots. Take your pruners and cut them off at the soil line and leave the roots in the ground to rot. Every root system you leave behind is organic matter already delivered exactly where next year's roots will want to go. And pulling it out just tears up the structure you spent all year building. Free compost, zero labor, already buried. So that's the 7. Now, let me put them back together the way you'll actually use them, because your problem isn't a list. Your problem is a particular patch of ground. If your problem is standing water that won't drain, your answers are raised beds with the floor cracked open underneath, the broad fork, and the daikon radish drilling channels down deep. If your problem is ground that bakes hard as a sidewalk every summer, your answer is organic matter in inches every single year and a thick mulch that never comes off, because covered clay can't crust. If your problem is a body that doesn't bend like it used to, your answers are the no-dig route, compost laid on top and left alone, the broad fork that spares your back, and the radish that does its drilling while you watch from the porch. And if your problem is money, the whole list is your answer, because leaves are free, clippings are free, leftover roots are free, and the most expensive thing I've told you to buy today is a $2 packet of seed. Now, the reason nobody taught you this, I told you we'd get here. There's no scheme to it, and I won't pretend there is. It's simpler and a little sadder than that. A garden center can't put autumn leaves in a bag and charge you $20 because you'd laugh at them. There's no margin in telling a man to crack his subsoil once and leave the roots in the ground, but a customer whose clay stays hard, whose plants keep dying, who comes back every April for another miracle in a bottle, that customer is worth money every single year. Nobody had to hide the old way. They just had nothing to gain by repeating it. And after a generation or two of nobody repeating it, it was gone. The old people knew this because they had to. Their grocery store was the back 40. Here's your task for this week, and it's free. Before Sunday, go out after the next rain, or run a hose for a minute if the sky won't cooperate, and do the squeeze test on the worst spot in your yard. Roll it in your hand. See if it ribbons between your fingers. That's it. You're not fixing anything yet. You're meeting your soil for the first time, honestly. And once you know what you've got, every move after that gets easier. And before you go, I want to ask you something different than zones and inches. Did your mother or your grandfather or some old neighbor down the road have their own trick for hard ground? Coffee grounds, wood ashes, burying the fish guts after a good day at the creek? Put it in the comments. Those little family tricks are exactly the kind of knowledge that disappears forever when nobody writes them down. And I read every single one. Next time, we're staying right on this subject because the question I hear most after fixing clay is what to plant in it while it's still heavy. There's a whole list of tough, beautiful perennials that don't just tolerate clay, they prefer it, and they'll be blooming for you while the soil underneath them gets better every year. That one will save you some heartbreak. Take care of that ground, and it'll take care of you. That's the old garden way. I'll see you in the garden.